People keep asking me why Grokipedia exists, why I even care about something that looks like a Wikipedia rival when I already have rockets landing themselves, cars driving themselves, neural interfaces, energy systems, and an AI company that people love to argue about. And the truth is, this has been on my mind for a very long time, long before it became a trending topic or a headline or a meme on X, because knowledge is infrastructure, and most people don't think of it that way. They think of roads and power grids and satellites, but knowledge is the substrate everything else runs on. And when I first started spending serious time online decades ago, I noticed something strange, which is that the internet promised decentralized truth but slowly drifted toward centralized narrative. And Wikipedia, while an extraordinary achievement, became a snapshot of consensus rather than a living interrogative system. So the idea for a Grokipedia wasn't to destroy Wikipedia or replace volunteers or wage some ideological war. It was to ask a simple engineering question. What if an encyclopedia could reason, update itself in real time, expose uncertainty, show competing models of reality, and tell you not just what people believe, but why they believe it and how confident we should be, because reality doesn't vote. Physics doesn't care about consensus, and neither does truth. And over the years, I watched information get more politicized, more brittle, more curated, and I kept thinking that if we're going to build artificial general intelligence, or anything close to it, it cannot be trained on static dogma. It has to wrestle with disagreement, evidence, and change. So, Grokipedia grew out of that need. An AI-native encyclopedia that treats knowledge as something probabilistic, something alive, something you can interrogate and argue with, something that can say, here is what we know, here is what we think we know, here is that we might be wrong about. And yes, people reacted strongly, some excited, some angry, some convinced it's a power grab or a vanity project. But I've learned over time that strong reactions usually mean you're touching something important. And the speculation online is fascinating because it mirrors exactly the problem Grokipedia is meant to address, which is people forming narratives with partial information, filling gaps with assumptions, and amplifying emotion over evidence. And that's not a criticism of humans, it's just how we're wired, which is why tools matter. Because tools shape behavior, and an encyclopedia that can dynamically reference sources, waste credibility, expose bias, and even reflect its own uncertainty could help raise the floor of public understanding. Not by telling people what to think, but by giving them better cognitive leverage. And I've said many times that AI is like summoning a demon if you're careless, but it's also like inventing fire, incredibly dangerous and incredibly transformative. And Grokipedia sits right at that intersection, because whoever controls the scaffolding of knowledge has an outsized influence on the future. And I don't think that scaffolding should be frozen in time or locked behind institutional inertia. I think it should be auditable, adaptive, and brutally honest about its limits. And yes, it will make mistakes, all systems do, but the difference is whether the system can correct itself faster than the world changes, and that's really the core idea. Building a knowledge engine that evolves at the speed of reality, not the speed of committee meetings. And when people say this is about ego or competition, I smile, because if you've spent your life watching rockets explode and then fly again, you stop caring about optics and start caring about outcomes. And the outcome I want is simple, even if the execution is hard. A civilization that argues less about what's real and spends more time solving real problems. And if Grokipedia contributes even a small part to that, then the years of planning, the controversy, the speculation, the noise, all of it will have been worth it. I want to continue this because part 1 only scratches the surface, and the deeper story is really about friction, about how every system resists being upgraded, especially systems that define reality for billions of people. Because once you touch knowledge, you touch power, and once you touch power, everyone suddenly has an opinion about your intentions. And I've seen that pattern repeat with electric cars, reusable rockets, private spaceflight, satellite internet, and now AI-driven knowledge systems. And Grokipedia is no different, because the moment people hear AI encyclopedia, they imagine a machine rewriting history or enforcing a single truth, when in fact the entire design philosophy is the opposite. It's about multiplicity, about showing forks instead of flattening them, about revealing how conclusions are formed rather than hiding them behind polished summaries. And that's why Grokipedia isn't meant to sound confident all the time. It's meant to say things like, this model predicts X with 62% confidence given current data, which is a far more honest way to engage with the world than pretending certainty where none exists. And this connects directly to how Grok itself thinks, because intelligence isn't about memorizing answers, it's about navigating ambiguity. And an encyclopedia that pretends ambiguity doesn't exist trains people to think in absolutes, which is incredibly dangerous in a complex civilization. And yes, the online reactions have been intense. Some people cheering, some people mocking, some people warning that this is the end of objective truth. But I've noticed that the loudest reactions often come from people who haven't looked closely at how existing systems already shape narratives through omission, lag, and institutional bias. And again, I don't say that as an attack, it's just entropy. All systems drift unless actively corrected. And Grokipedia is an attempt to build correction into the core architecture, not as an afterthought. And one of the things people don't talk about enough is speed, because reality updates every second. Scientific papers drop daily, data streams never stop, and yet most public knowledge repositories update on human timescales, weeks, months, sometimes years, which means the map slowly diverges from the territory. And once that gap grows large enough, people lose trust. And when trust collapses, conspiracy fills the vacuum. So if Grokipedia does nothing else, it aims to compress that gap, to keep the map closer to the territory by continuously ingesting, cross-checking, and contextualizing information. And that's also why transparency matters so much. Because if people can see why an answer exists, what sources were used, what counter-arguments remain unresolved, they're less likely to treat the system as an oracle and more like a thinking partner. And that's the real vision here. Not an authority, not a replacement for human judgment, but an amplifier of curiosity. And I know that sounds idealistic, but every major leap starts that way. And along the way there will be failures, missteps, misinterpretations, probably headlines declaring it a disaster or a threat, and that's fine, because progress is noisy, and I'd rather deal with noise than stagnation. And when I look at the long arc, the thing that worries me most isn't AI becoming too powerful. It's humans becoming intellectually complacent, outsourcing thinking without understanding. And Grokipedia is designed to push in the opposite direction, to make people ask better questions, to expose how fragile some beliefs are and how strong others actually become when tested, and if that makes people uncomfortable, that's not a bug, that's a signal. Because discomfort is often the first step toward clarity. And whether Grokipedia ultimately succeeds or fails, the attempt itself matters, because it forces a conversation about how we curate truth in the age of machines. And that conversation was inevitable anyway. This just accelerates it, and as always, I'd rather build and iterate than wait politely while the future happens to us. This was never really about an encyclopedia at all. It was about trajectory, about where human understanding is headed when machines don't just store information, but actively participate in shaping how we explore it. And I've spent a lot of nights thinking about that, usually staring at some unreadable engineering diagram at 3 a.m. Because the uncomfortable truth is that intelligence amplification changes the rules of civilization, and Grokipedia sits right in the middle of that shift. Because once an AI can contextualize knowledge across domains, history, physics, economics, psychology, geopolitics, you stop treating facts as isolated bricks and start seeing them as load-bearing structures. And when people online speculate that this is some kind of attempt to rewrite reality, what they're really reacting to is the fear of losing a familiar interface with truth, a static page, a tidy summary, a sense that someone else already sorted the chaos for you. But chaos is where discovery lives, and one of the biggest mistakes we've made as a society is confusing comfort with correctness. So Grokipedia intentionally refuses to be comforting. It doesn't smooth over contradictions. It surfaces them. It shows you where experts disagree, and where data is thin, and where incentives might be distorting conclusions